day I pulled a drowning Bigfoot from a lake changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I'm not the kind of person who believes in fairy tales or cryptids or any of that stuff. I'm a hiker. I've spent years in these woods, probably logged thousands of miles on these trails since I moved out here about 7 years ago. Before that, I was living in a city, stuck in an office job that was slowly killing me. The mountains saved me, honestly. Every weekend I could manage it, I'd pack up and head out to the trails. Eventually, I left the city altogether, got a job I could do remotely, and moved closer to the wilderness. Best decision I ever made. I've seen just about everything you can see out here. Bears, of course, plenty of black bears. Mountain lions on a few occasions, though they usually keep their distance. Elk during mating season, which is both beautiful and terrifying when you hear those bulls bugling. Bobcats, foxes, more deer than I can count. I've helped pull dogs out of rivers when their owners got careless. I've called rangers about injured wildlife. Once I even got between a bear cub and a highway, which in retrospect was incredibly stupid, but it worked out. The point is, I know these woods. I know what belongs here and what doesn't, and I'd never seen anything like what happened that day last summer. Let me back up and tell you the whole thing from the beginning because the details matter. It was a Saturday morning in July, one of those perfect hiking days where everything just feels right. The weather forecast had been ideal all week, and I've been watching it obsessively, planning this trip. Not too hot, not too cold, just this crisp mountain air in the mid-70s that makes you want to spend the entire day outside. I woke up early, around 5 in the morning before the sun was up. Made myself a big breakfast because I knew I'd be burning calories all day. Eggs, toast, some fruit. I checked my gear while I ate, going through my mental checklist like I always do. I packed light because I was planning to hike familiar territory and be back before dark. 2 water bottles, both filled, a bag of trail mix, some energy bars, a couple pieces of beef jerky. My camera because you never know when you'll spot some interesting wildlife. My first aid kit, which is something I never hike without. Band-aids for blisters, gauze, medical tape, some basic pain medication, and elastic bandage. Just the essentials. I threw in a small flashlight even though I wasn't planning to be out past dark and my phone fully charged. A small knife, some waterproof matches. Nothing fancy, just practical stuff. The drive to the trailhead took about 45 minutes. I left my place around 6 in the morning, watching the sun come up over the mountains as I drove. There's something special about that drive. The way the light changes as you get further from civilization. The roads get narrower, more winding. The trees get denser. You pass fewer and fewer houses until eventually it's just you and the forest. I pulled into the small dirt parking area around 6:45. There was one other car there, which wasn't unusual for a Saturday morning, but I knew from experience that most weekend hikers stick to the popular trails. The one I was planning to take branches off about a mile in, and most people don't even notice it. It's not marked on most maps, just a trail that locals know about. 3 miles from the nearest road, which means you don't run into many other people, just you and nature. I started up the trail around 7, and the morning was absolutely perfect. The temperature was cool, probably in the low 60s, and there was hardly any humidity. The sun was still low, creating these long shadows through the pine trees. Birds were everywhere, singing their morning songs. Chickadees, jays, woodpeckers hammering away at tree trunks. The occasional rustle in the bushes would turn out to be a squirrel or a rabbit darting away. The forest floor was covered in pine needles, soft and quiet under my boots. The first hour of hiking was steady uphill, not too steep, but enough to get your heart rate up. I fell into that rhythm that experienced hikers know, where your breathing syncs with your steps, and you can just keep going for hours. Around 8:30, I reached the split where the main trail continues onto a popular overlook, but the smaller trail branches off to the right. I took the smaller trail like I always do. This is where things get really remote. The trail gets narrower, less maintained, tree roots crossing the path that you have to watch out for, a few spots where you have to scramble over rocks or fallen trees. It's more work, but that's why I love it. You feel like you're really out there, really in the wilderness. The terrain changed as I went deeper, more rocky outcroppings, more elevation changes. The trees got bigger, old-growth pines that must have been standing there for 100 years or more. There's something humbling about walking among trees that old. Makes you feel small in a good way, like you're part of something bigger. By 10 in the morning, I'd been hiking for 3 hours and covered probably 6 or 7 miles. I was starting to feel it in my legs, that good burn that tells you you've been working. I decided to take a break. There was this nice clearing up ahead, one of my favorite spots on the whole trail. You can see through the trees to a small lake, maybe a couple 100 yards across, surrounded by pine trees and these massive granite boulders. Some of those boulders are as big as cars, just sitting there like they've been there since the Ice Age. I found a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, dropped my pack, and sat down. The log was smooth and sun-warmed, comfortable. I pulled out one of my water bottles and took a long drink. The water was still cold from my freezer, refreshing. I grabbed a granola bar from my pack and unwrapped it, eating slowly, just taking everything in. The lake was visible through a gap in the trees, perfectly still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The water in that lake is crystal clear. I've been swimming in it before, and you can see straight to the bottom in most places. It's one of those places that just makes you feel at peace, you know? Like all the stress and noise of regular life just melts away. I was sitting there, probably for about 15 minutes, just being quiet and enjoying the moment. That's when I heard the splashing. At first, it was just a sound in the background, a kind of rhythmic splash, splash, splash. My first thought was that it was probably a bear. They fish in that lake sometimes, especially in summer when the salmon are running. The sound wasn't alarming at first, but then it changed. The splashing got more violent, more frantic. There was desperation in it, if that makes sense. It wasn't the sound of an animal playing or fishing. It was the sound of something fighting, struggling. I stood up from the log, my senses suddenly alert. The sound was getting more intense, mixed with these strange grunting noises, deep, guttural sounds that I couldn't quite identify. My first instinct was that maybe another hiker had gotten into trouble. I grabbed my pack quickly, not bothering to put it on properly, just holding it by one strap, and started moving toward the lake as fast as I could without running. The closer I got, the worse the sound became. The splashing was now mixed with this frantic thrashing, and those grunting sounds were getting louder, more frequent. They sounded almost human, but not quite. Something was off about them, too deep, too raw. I pushed through the underbrush, branches catching at my clothes and my pack. The trees opened up, and I broke through the tree line into the open area around the lake. The sun was bright here, no tree cover, and I had to squint for a second while my eyes adjusted. That's when I saw it. There was something in the water, maybe 50 feet from shore. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was big, massive, with arms thrashing above the surface, trying to stay afloat. Its head kept going underwater and then coming back up. And each time it surfaced, I could hear it gasping, taking huge, desperate breaths before going under again. And the thing that made my brain just stop working for a second was that this creature was covered entirely in hair. Dark brown or black hair, matted and wet, covering every visible inch of it. Even from where I stood, I could tell this thing was huge, 7 feet tall at least, maybe 8. Its shoulders were broader than any human I'd ever seen. The arms were thick, muscular, powerful looking even in their desperate flailing. And even though it was clearly drowning, clearly in distress, I could see the proportions were all wrong for it to be a person. The head was too large, the arms too long, the whole shape of it just fundamentally different from a human. My first thought, and I remember this so clearly because it was so absurd, was, this can't be real. Like maybe I was having some kind of heat stroke hallucination, even though it wasn't that hot. But the sounds were too real. The splashing, the grunting, the desperate gasping for air. This was happening. My second thought was, that's a Bigfoot. And as soon as I thought it, my rational brain tried to reject it. Bigfoot isn't real. It's a myth, a legend, something people make up for attention or to sell books. But I was looking right at it. I could see it with my own eyes, hear it with my own ears. My brain started racing through explanations, desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe it was someone in a gorilla suit? But who would wear something like that out here, miles from anywhere? And why would they be drowning? Maybe it was a bear standing upright, but this thing was way too tall, way too human-like in its movements. Every rational explanation I tried to come up with just didn't fit. The size was wrong, the proportions were wrong, the setting was wrong, and while I was standing there frozen, trying to process the impossible, the creature's movements were getting weaker. Its arms, which had been thrashing frantically, were slowing down. The head was spending longer and longer underwater before managing to get back to the surface. Each breath sounded more labored, more desperate, and then I looked at its eyes. The eyes locked onto mine across that distance, and I know this sounds crazy, but they looked human. Not exactly human, but close enough that I recognized what I saw there. Panic. Pure, desperate, primal panic. The same look I've seen in the eyes of drowning animals before. That terrible awareness that death is coming and there's nothing you can do about it. And in that moment, staring into those eyes, something shifted in me. I stopped trying to figure out what this thing was. It didn't matter. What mattered was that some living creature was drowning right in front of me, and I was the only person around who could help. I stood there frozen for what was probably only a few seconds, but felt like forever. Part of me was screaming to run, to get out of there, to not get involved with whatever impossible thing was happening. But another part of me, the bigger part, the part that defines who I am as a person, couldn't just stand there and watch any living thing drown. I've pulled dogs out of rivers before when their owners got careless. I've stopped my car to help injured deer on the side of the road. I once spent 2 hours in the rain helping a turtle cross a highway because I couldn't stand the thought of it getting hit. It's just who I am. I can't walk away from something that needs help, no matter what it is. The creature's eyes locked onto mine again, and in that moment, the decision was made for me. This thing needed help. It was going to die if I didn't do something. I dropped my pack on the ground and started looking around frantically for anything I could use. I couldn't just swim out there. It was too far and the creature was too big. If it panicked and grabbed onto me, we'd both drown. I needed something to extend my reach, something to help from a distance. There were dead branches scattered along the shoreline. I grabbed the longest one I could find that looked sturdy enough, probably about 10 feet long and maybe 3 inches thick. It had some weight to it, but wasn't too heavy to throw. I moved to the water's edge, waving the branch in the air and yelling, trying to get the creature's attention. At first, it didn't notice, too focused on trying to stay alive, but then its head turned toward me. I held up the branch, trying to show it that I was going to help, that I had something it could grab onto. The creature seemed to understand. It stopped thrashing for just a moment and reached one massive arm in my direction. I pulled the branch back and threw it as hard as I could, trying to get it close enough for the creature to reach. The branch landed about 5 feet short. I watched it floating there on the surface, just out of reach, and my heart sank. The creature tried to move toward it, but it wasn't going anywhere. It was just struggling in the same spot, like it was anchored there somehow. I ran back to the tree line and grabbed another branch, longer this time, maybe 12 feet. I repeated the process, waving to get the creature's attention, then throwing with all my strength. This time the branch landed closer, maybe 3 feet away, close but still not close enough. The creature made a sound, this low grunt that sounded almost like frustration, and reached for it. Its fingers brushed the branch but couldn't quite grasp it. I tried a 3rd time and then a 4th, and each time the result was the same. The branches were either too short to reach or the creature couldn't grab them. And even if it could grab one, I realized there was no way I had the strength to pull something that massive to shore. This thing probably weighed 400 or 500 pounds, maybe more. Physics just wasn't on my side here. I stood there on the shore, feeling helpless and frustrated. The creature was still struggling, but I could see it was getting tired. The movements were slower now, less coordinated. It was running out of time. That's when I noticed the fallen tree trunk. It was partially in the water, partially on shore, lying at an angle between some rocks. The trunk was big, maybe 12 feet long and thick as my thigh, one of those pine trees that had probably been knocked over in a storm years ago. The wood was weathered gray but looked solid. And most importantly, when I pushed on it, it moved. It was buoyant, floating in the water even with its weight. An idea formed in my mind. If I could get the trunk out to the creature, it could use it as a flotation device, something to hold on to keep its head above water. It wouldn't get it to shore, but it would keep it from drowning while I figured out what to do next. I started pushing the trunk, trying to get it fully into the water. It was heavy, probably a couple 100 pounds, and my feet kept slipping on the wet rocks. I pushed and pulled, grunting with effort, my boots sliding. Finally, I got it positioned at the edge of the water. I gave it a hard shove and it slid in with a splash, floating almost entirely on the surface. I knew I couldn't push it from shore. I'd have to get in the water with it. The thought terrified me for 2 reasons. First, the water was going to be cold, mountain lake cold, fed by snowmelt even in July. Second, I'd be in the water with whatever that creature was, and I had no idea if it might grab me in its panic. But there wasn't time to debate it. I kicked off my boots and socks, pulled off my shirt, and waded into the water in just my pants. The cold hit me like a physical blow. It actually hurt, that sharp, breathtaking cold that makes you gasp. The water was probably in the 50s, maybe low 60s at most. My legs went numb almost immediately. I positioned myself behind the trunk, my hands on the rough bark, and started kicking. My legs barely seemed to be working in the cold water, sluggish and uncooperative. I kicked harder, pushing with my arms, trying to drive the trunk forward. It moved, but slowly, so slowly. The creature had stopped thrashing and was just barely staying afloat now, its movements weak and uncoordinated. I could see its eyes still locked on me, still aware but fading. I kicked harder, ignoring the burn in my legs, ignoring how cold I was, just focusing on moving that trunk forward. It took several minutes that felt like hours. My legs were screaming at me, burning despite the cold. My arms were shaking from the effort of pushing. But slowly, inch by inch, I moved the trunk across that 50 feet of water. The creature was watching me the whole time, and I'd like to think there was something like hope in those eyes. Finally, I pushed the trunk within reach. The creature grabbed onto it with both massive hands, and the relief on its face was immediate and unmistakable. It stopped trying to swim, stopped thrashing, just held on and breathed. Deep, gasping breaths. Its chest was heaving, the whole body shuddering with exhaustion. I treaded water a few feet away, catching my own breath. My legs felt like jelly. My arms were so tired I could barely keep myself afloat. But I'd done it. The creature wasn't drowning anymore. And that's when I got my first really good look at it. Up close, it was even more incredible than from the shore. The face was definitely humanoid but broader, with a flatter nose and a more pronounced brow. The eyes were deep set, dark brown, or maybe black, and definitely intelligent. There was awareness there, understanding. The shoulders were massive, broader than any human could achieve even with steroids and a lifetime of weightlifting. The arms, even wet and hanging onto the trunk, were thick as tree trunks, corded with muscle under the hair. The hands were huge, probably twice the size of mine, with thick fingers that wrapped around the trunk easily. This was real. This was actually happening. I was treading water 3 feet away from a Bigfoot. But something was still wrong. The creature was holding onto the trunk, safe for now, but it wasn't moving. It wasn't trying to swim to shore. It was just staying in place. And after a minute, I realized it wasn't just tired. Something was keeping it there. The creature made eye contact with me again, and there was something different in that look now. Not panic anymore, but something pleading. It made a sound, a low grunt, almost like it was trying to talk to me. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It pointed down into the water with one hand while holding the trunk with the other. It kept pointing, looking at me, then looking down at the water, then back at me. I didn't understand at first, but it kept doing it, kept pointing down with increasing urgency. And then it hit me. Oh no, it was stuck. It wasn't just drowning because it couldn't swim. Something underwater was holding it there, trapping it. I treaded water, trying to process this new information. This changed everything. I couldn't just help it float and wait for it to recover. It was physically trapped. If I didn't figure out how to free it, it would just be a slower death hanging onto that trunk until exhaustion took over. I looked at the creature and it looked back at me. And I knew what I had to do. I had to go underwater. I had to see what was holding it, and I had to figure out how to free it. But I didn't have a choice. I took several deep breaths, hyperventilating to load up my blood with oxygen. The creature watched me, seeming to understand what I was about to do. I gave it a look that I hoped communicated I'll be right back, and then I dove. The cold water was even worse underwater. It felt like it was crushing my chest, squeezing my lungs. I opened my eyes despite the sting. The visibility was poor, maybe 10 feet at best. The water near the bottom had been churned up by all the thrashing, full of sediment. I swam down, pulling with my arms, kicking with my numb legs, 10 feet, 12 feet deeper. My ears were starting to hurt from the pressure. I could see the creature's legs now, and one of them was clearly trapped. The right leg was wedged between a large boulder and some kind of rocky formation caught at the ankle. The boulder was massive, probably weighing several hundred pounds at least. The creature's foot must have slipped into the gap between them. Then the boulder had shifted slightly, pinning it there like a vice. My lungs were already starting to burn. I'd been down for maybe 20 seconds and I needed to surface. I kicked upward, breaking the surface and gasping for air. The creature was watching me anxiously, and I could see the question in its eyes. Now I understood the full horror of the situation. This thing had been trapped down there for who knows how long. It must have been pulling itself up to breathe and then going back under, over and over for minutes or maybe even hours, slowly exhausting itself. I treaded water, thinking frantically. I couldn't just pull the leg free. The boulder was way too heavy. But I remembered something from high school physics, a lesson about simple machines, levers, and fulcrums. If I could find something long and strong enough to use as a lever, I might be able to shift the boulder enough to free the foot. The branches, those thick branches I'd tried to throw. One of them had been pretty sturdy, maybe 10 feet long and solid wood. If I could wedge it under the boulder and use the rocks as a fulcrum point, I might be able to create enough leverage to shift it. I swam back to shore, my arms and legs barely responding now. I was so cold I was starting to shake, but I didn't have time to warm up. The creature needed help now. I found the branch I was thinking of, tested its strength by putting my weight on it. It bent slightly but held. It would have to work. Getting the branch back out to the creature was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was awkward in the water, wanting to float and spin in ways that made it hard to control. I swam on my back, holding the branch against my chest, kicking weakly. It took forever, or felt like it. The creature watched me the whole time. When I finally made it back, I treaded water for a moment, trying to catch my breath. Then I tried to communicate what I was going to do. I held up the branch, pointed down at where its leg was trapped, and made a lifting motion with my hands. The creature seemed to understand. It nodded, actually nodded. And I was struck once again by the intelligence in those eyes. I took several deep breaths, hyperventilating again. Then I dove, pulling the branch down with me. It fought the water, wanting to float up, making it harder to swim. I reached the bottom, positioned the branch under the edge of the boulder. The rock formation nearby would work as a fulcrum point. I wedged the end of the branch deep under the boulder, trying to get it as far in as possible for maximum leverage. My lungs were burning. I'd been down for maybe 30 seconds and I needed air badly. I surfaced, gasped, explained through gestures to the creature that it needed to pull its leg when the boulder moved. The creature grunted what I took as understanding. I dove again, finding the branch in position. I planted my feet against the rocky bottom for leverage and began pushing down on my end of the branch with everything I had. At first, nothing happened. The boulder didn't budge. I pushed harder, my arms shaking with effort, my legs driving against the rocks. The branch was bending, and for a terrible moment, I thought it might snap. But then I felt it, the slightest give, the boulder shifting just a tiny bit. But my lungs were screaming at me now. I could see dark spots forming at the edges of my vision. I needed air. I had to surface. I came up, gasping, frustrated. The creature looked at me, and I could see it understood this was going to take multiple attempts. I caught my breath for what felt like a long time, but was probably only about 30 seconds. My whole body was shaking now from the cold and the exertion and the adrenaline. But I had to try again. I dove down one more time. I could see the creature was holding its breath too, preparing to help. I found the branch, positioned my feet, and pushed. This time I pushed with absolutely everything I had, every ounce of strength left in my exhausted body. I pushed until I thought my arms would give out, pushed until my vision started to tunnel, pushed until I felt like I might pass out down there. And the boulder moved, just 2 inches, maybe 3, but it moved. I felt it shift under the pressure. And in that moment, the creature grabbed its trapped leg with both hands and yanked with desperate strength. The foot suddenly came free, pulling out of the gap. We both surfaced at exactly the same time, bursting up out of the water and gasping for air like we'd been down there for minutes. I was coughing, sputtering, barely able to keep myself afloat. The creature was still clinging to the trunk with one hand, breathing heavily, but both legs were now free. I treaded water, exhausted beyond anything I'd ever felt before, but relieved. We'd done it. The creature was free. After a moment, I gestured toward shore, trying to communicate that it should swim there now. The creature began moving, using an awkward swimming motion, pushing the trunk ahead of it. It was clear this thing was not a strong swimmer, which explained how it had gotten trapped in the first place. The progress was painfully slow. I stayed close, ready to help if needed, though I didn't have much strength left to offer. But after what felt like forever, the creature's feet touched bottom. It stood up in the shallow water, still holding the trunk, and began walking. Its movements were unsteady, exhausted. I followed a few feet behind, giving it space but staying close enough to help if it fell. We both reached the shore and collapsed on the rocky beach. I lay there on my back, my chest heaving, my whole body shaking from cold and exhaustion. I could hear the creature breathing heavily beside me. Similar ragged gasps. We just lay there for several minutes, neither of us moving. I stared up at the sky, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally sat up, I looked over at the creature. It was sitting about 20 feet away, also looking at me. We studied each other carefully, really seeing each other for the first time without the panic and urgency of the rescue. My heart was still racing. I was suddenly very aware of how alone we were out here. This thing was massive up close. Its arms were easily twice as thick as my legs. It could overpower me without any effort if it wanted to. But it made no aggressive moves. It just sat there, breathing heavily, examining its injured ankle. The ankle was clearly swollen, probably sprained or worse from the hours it had spent trapped. The creature gently touched the injury with one massive hand and winced, making a sound that was almost a whimper. Then something happened that I'll never forget as long as I live. The creature looked up from its ankle and our eyes met. Slowly, deliberately, with obvious intention, it bowed its head. This wasn't a nod. This was a deep, respectful bow, the kind you might see in a martial arts movie or a formal ceremony. It held the bow for several seconds, its eyes closed. Then it raised its head, looked at me again, and placed one massive hand over its chest, right over where its heart would be. The gesture was so unmistakably human, so clearly a sign of gratitude, that I felt emotion welling up in my chest. My eyes actually started to water, though that might have partly been from exhaustion. This creature, this impossible thing that wasn't supposed to exist, was thanking me, really thanking me, with intention and understanding and genuine feeling. I didn't know what else to do, so I nodded back. It seemed inadequate, but it was all I could think of. The creature seemed satisfied with this exchange, making a soft grunt that almost sounded content. It attempted to stand, putting weight on the injured leg. Immediately, it limped badly, almost falling before catching itself. It took a few awkward steps, clearly in pain, but the creature was already moving away from the shore, limping toward the tree line. Without thinking, I called out, just made a sound, not even a word. The creature paused and looked back at me over its shoulder, and then it did something else, unexpected. It gestured with one hand, a kind of come here motion, beckoning. Follow me. Every survival instinct I had started screaming warnings. Don't follow it into the forest. Don't go into unknown territory. This could be dangerous. But I looked at its face, at those intelligent eyes, and something in its demeanor just seemed safe. Trustworthy even. There was no aggression there, no threat, just an invitation. And honestly, if this thing wanted to hurt me, it could have done it already. It could have pulled me underwater while I was trying to help it. Instead, it had cooperated with the rescue, had understood what I was trying to do, had helped me free it. And more than that, I was curious, intensely curious. This was a Bigfoot, a real living Bigfoot, something that science said didn't exist. And it was inviting me to follow it. How could I say no to that? I grabbed my pack, my hands still shaking from cold and exertion. I pulled my damp shirt back on. It had stayed on the shore while I was in the water, which didn't help much with the warmth, but felt better than being shirtless. I put on my socks and boots, my fingers fumbling with the laces. The creature waited patiently, watching me get ready. Then it turned and started walking, slowly because of the limp. I followed, maintaining a distance of about 15 to 20 feet, close enough to keep it in sight, far enough to feel like I had some reaction time if something went wrong. The creature limped ahead, moving through the forest with a kind of natural grace despite the injury. Every now and then it would glance back over its shoulder, checking to make sure I was still following. At first, the path seemed random. We were just wandering through the trees, no apparent direction or destination. But after about 10 minutes, I started noticing things. Branches that were broken and bent at specific angles, not the random breaks you get from storms or animals, but deliberate bends that pointed in a particular direction. Scratches on tree bark at regular intervals, too uniform to be from bears sharpening their claws. Small stacks of stones arranged like cairns, 3 or 4 rocks balanced on top of each other. These were trail markers. This was a trail system as deliberate and purposeful as any human hiking trail, just more subtle. The creature wasn't wandering randomly. It knew exactly where it was going. This was its territory. We walked for about 30 or 40 minutes, moving steadily uphill. The terrain was getting rockier, more rugged. I'd been hiking these mountains for years, and I'd never been this far in this direction. This was completely unfamiliar territory to me. The trees were getting bigger, older, more deadfall on the ground, more moss covering everything. And I started seeing more signs, trees with bark stripped off in neat vertical strips, deliberate harvesting. Small clearings where the grass was flattened down in circular patterns like something large had been sleeping there repeatedly. A stack of bones near a small creek. Deer bones arranged in a way that seemed purposeful. I had this growing feeling that I was deep in someone else's territory now. Not threatening exactly, but definitely marked. This place belonged to the creature or to others like it. I was a guest here. Maybe an honored guest given what had happened, but still a guest in a place that wasn't meant for humans. The creature led me into a small valley between 2 rock formations, a natural canyon maybe 100 yards across. The walls were steep on both sides, covered in trees and bushes. And that's when I started seeing the structures. They were weird, unlike anything I'd seen before. Branches woven together forming these teepee-like shapes, some standing upright, some leaning, some that had fallen over and were gradually being reclaimed by the forest. They ranged from maybe 6 feet tall to 10 feet or more. Some were tight and neat, branches woven together in complex patterns. Others were looser, more haphazard. The structures were too deliberate to be natural. These had been made, constructed with purpose. Some of the structures had leaves and moss covering them, suggesting they were old, maybe years old. Others looked newer, the wood still fresh and lighter colored. This was evidence of intelligence, of planning and construction. This was culture. The realization sent chills down my spine. The creature stopped at the base of a rocky hillside. There was a cave entrance there, about 8 feet high and 6 feet wide. The opening was partially concealed by hanging vines and brush that had grown over and around it. Perfect camouflage. The creature gestured for me to wait, a clear hand signal that even across species was unmistakable. Then it limped toward the cave entrance and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there outside, my heart pounding in my chest again. There were more signs around the entrance, bones scattered around, some small like rabbits or birds, some larger like deer. Tufts of fur caught on branches, smooth stones arranged in a circle near the entrance. This was definitely a dwelling. Someone lived here. I could hear movement inside the cave, shuffling sounds, the occasional grunt or scrape. The thought of more Bigfoot suddenly appearing from the cave was both thrilling and terrifying. I thought about my phone in my pack. I could take a picture. I could have proof of this, evidence that would convince the world. But something stopped me from reaching for it. It felt wrong, like a violation. The creature had just trusted me enough to lead me to its home. Taking a picture felt like betrayal. After what was probably 5 or 10 minutes but felt longer, the creature emerged from the cave. It was carrying something in its massive hands. As it got closer, I could see what it was. 2 dead rabbits, recently killed, still fresh and limp, fur matted with blood where they'd been struck or bitten. The creature walked up to me, still limping, and held them out, offering them. Its eyes met mine, and there was something expectant in that look. I was stunned. I realized immediately what this meant. This was a gift, payment maybe, or repayment. A thank you in the most concrete way the creature knew how to give. Food. In its world, in a survival situation, food was valuable. Food was everything. And it was sharing its resources with me, giving me something it had killed, something it could have eaten itself. The gesture was so profound, so meaningful, that I felt my throat tighten up. This thing had almost died today, was injured, probably exhausted and hungry, and it was giving me food. How could I refuse? I hesitated, not sure how to respond. The creature continued holding out the rabbits patiently, waiting. Finally, I reached out and took them. They were heavier than I expected, well-fed rabbits, probably 3 or 4 pounds each. The fur was soft under my hands, the bodies were still warm. The creature seemed pleased, making a soft grunt, something that might have been satisfaction. I remembered the bow gesture from earlier. I bowed my head deeply to the creature, holding the bow for several seconds like it had done. Then I mimicked the hand-over-chest gesture, placing my palm over my heart. The creature's face changed. It was hard to read expressions on something so different from human, but I'd swear it smiled. The eyes crinkled slightly, the mouth turned up at the corners. It seemed genuinely pleased, maybe even happy. We stood there for another moment, just looking at each other. There was so much I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted to ask. But there was no way to communicate beyond simple gestures. And somehow that felt okay. Some things don't need words. The creature backed toward the cave entrance, maintaining eye contact the whole time. Not threatening, not suspicious, just watching, almost reluctant, like it didn't want this encounter to end. I felt the same strange reluctance. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay, to learn more, to understand. But I couldn't stay. The sun was getting lower. I needed to get back to my car before dark. I had a long hike ahead of me. I took a step backward, then another. The creature watched, still as a statue. I turned and started walking, heading back the way we'd come. The rabbit still in my hands. I glanced back once. The creature was still there, still visible at the cave entrance, still watching me. I raised one hand in a wave, feeling foolish, but not knowing what else to do. The creature didn't respond, but its head tilted slightly, like a dog trying to understand something. Then I turned away and continued walking. The journey back took longer, probably about an hour. I was exhausted, my legs like jelly, my whole body aching. But I retraced the path using the trail markers, following the broken branches and the scratches and the stone cairns. It worked. The system was clear once you knew what to look for. My mind was spinning with what had just happened. I kept replaying every moment from the first sound of splashing to the gift of the rabbits. Each piece felt impossible, but I'd lived through all of it. It was real. I knew no one would believe this story. Even my closest friends would think I'd made it up or misinterpreted what I'd seen. Bigfoot doesn't exist. That's what everyone knows. So either I was lying or I was wrong about what I'd seen. But I knew the truth. I'd seen it with my own eyes, touched it with my own hands. I'd looked into its eyes and seen intelligence looking back. I'd watched it understand my gestures, had seen it communicate back. I'd followed it through the forest and seen evidence of culture, of construction, of habitation. It was real. I finally reached familiar territory near the lake. I checked my watch. It was after 2 p.m. The entire experience, from first hearing the splashing to getting back to the lake, had taken about 3 hours. It felt like days. I hiked back to my car in a daze. The trail that had felt beautiful and peaceful this morning now felt different, charged with possibility. Every shadow in the trees could be a Bigfoot. Every snapped branch could be a trail marker. The forest had secrets, and I'd just learned one of them. When I got home, I couldn't tell anyone the truth. I just said I'd had a good hike, caught a couple rabbits, which was technically true. That evening, I cleaned and prepared the rabbits. I'd cleaned game before, so I knew what I was doing, but this felt different. Each movement reminded me of the creature. These were a gift from a Bigfoot. These meant something. They represented a connection across species, a moment of mutual understanding and respect. I cooked them carefully, almost reverently. I used a simple recipe, not wanting to disguise the meat with too many flavors. Roasted with some herbs and vegetables. They were the best meal I'd had in years, not because the meat was exceptional, but because of what they represented. Every bite was a reminder of what had happened. The following days were strange. I went to work, did my normal routine, but I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. It was like part of my brain was still back there in the forest, trying to process what I'd seen. I wanted to tell someone, needed to tell someone, but who would believe it? I started researching online, reading about Bigfoot sightings. I'd always dismissed them before. But now I read them differently. Thousands of reports going back decades from all over North America. Many describe behavior patterns similar to what I'd seen: intelligence, tool use, the building of structures. Some mentioned gifts being left, food or objects arranged near campsites. I read about something called habituation, which is when these creatures have repeated peaceful contact with specific humans. People who own property in remote areas sometimes report ongoing interactions, gifts exchanged, respectful distance maintained. It was exactly what had happened with me, or what might happen if I went back. And that was the question, wasn't it? Should I go back? Part of me was screaming, yes. This was the most incredible thing that had ever happened to me. I'd made contact with a species that wasn't supposed to exist. I'd saved its life. We'd communicated, made a connection. But another part of me was cautious. I'd gotten lucky once. The creature had been in distress, grateful for help, in no position to be aggressive. But what if I went back and it was different? 3 weeks passed. I went on my regular weekend hikes, but I avoided that particular trail. I told myself I was being smart, being safe. But really, I was scared. But I couldn't shake the curiosity. And something else, something that felt almost like responsibility. I wanted to check if the creature's leg had healed. I wanted to make sure it was okay. Finally, on a Friday evening 3 weeks after the encounter, I was packing for my weekend trip. I kept hesitating over which trail to take. I pulled out maps, looked at different options, but I couldn't fool myself anymore. I knew where I wanted to go. I was going back to that lake. I packed differently this time. More food, including some extra that I could leave as a gift. Better supplies in my first aid kit. Some dried fish from a camping store. I felt a little ridiculous, packing for a Bigfoot encounter like I was preparing for a meeting with a friend. But that's kind of how it felt. Saturday morning, I drove to the same trailhead. My heart was pounding the moment I parked. 3 weeks ago, I'd been an ordinary hiker. Now I was someone who knew something that most of the world didn't. The hike to the lake was both familiar and strange. It was late summer now, a little hotter, the forest starting to show the first hints of autumn. Some leaves were turning color early. I found myself being hyper-aware of everything. Every sound, every movement in the bushes could be the creature. I reached the lake by mid-morning. Everything looked the same. The clear water, the boulders, the pine trees. I could see the spot where I'd entered the water, where the creature had been trapped. I set up camp in a small clearing not far from where I'd taken my break that first day. I brought a small tent this time, planning to stay overnight, I wasn't trying to force an encounter, but I was making myself available. If the creature was around, if it remembered me, it would know I was there. The evening was peaceful. I cooked dinner over a small fire. I kept scanning the tree line, looking for any sign of the creature. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of the forest. I went to sleep in my tent, leaving the fly open so I could see the stars through the mesh. I lay awake for hours listening to the forest sounds, my mind replaying that day 3 weeks ago. Finally, I fell asleep near midnight. I woke to bird calls, light streaming through the tent. It was morning, the lake mirror calm in the early light. I climbed out of my tent, stretched, made breakfast, still no sign of the creature. I decided to hike around the lake, exploring the shoreline, staying visible. I found more of those strange branch structures, definitely more than last time I was here. Some look fresh, the wood still green, evidence that someone, something had been active in this area recently. My heart beat faster, the creature was still around. In the afternoon, I took a break on a fallen log near a clearing. I was eating trail mix, enjoying the silence and the sunshine, when suddenly I felt it. That sensation of being watched, the kind of feeling you can't explain but you know is real. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I slowly turned around, scanning the tree line. At first, I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows and undergrowth. But I kept looking, and then I saw movement. About 100 yards away, partially hidden by the trees, was the creature. It was standing completely still, just watching me. Not hiding exactly, but not approaching either. It seemed to be assessing the situation. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that moment I knew it recognized me. This was the same creature. It remembered. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move, didn't want to spook it. We just stared at each other across the distance. The moment felt timeless, stretched out forever. Slowly, carefully, I raised one hand. Not threatening, not waving frantically, just a simple greeting. The creature didn't move for a long moment. Then, unmistakably, deliberately, it bowed its head. The same gesture from before, the same slow, respectful bow. It held the bow for several seconds, and I felt emotion flooding through me. It remembered, it recognized me, and it was acknowledging that, acknowledging what had happened between us. The creature raised its head and met my eyes again. There was something in that look, something I couldn't quite name. Recognition, yes, but maybe also something like friendship, trust, understanding. Neither of us approached, neither of us tried to close the distance, and somehow that felt exactly right. This wasn't about getting closer, this was about mutual respect, about acknowledging what we'd shared and honoring it by maintaining appropriate boundaries. We just stood there like that, looking at each other across 100 yards of forest. I could see its face more clearly now in the afternoon light. I could see that it looked healthy. The walk seemed better, just the slightest limp visible. The ankle had healed, or was healing well. Relief flooded through me. The creature seemed satisfied with whatever it had come here to see. Maybe it had been checking on me the same way I'd been hoping to check on it. Maybe it just wanted to see if I'd come back. Finally, the creature turned. Not quickly, not like it was fleeing, just a calm, peaceful turn. And it began walking away, moving through the forest with that same natural grace I'd seen before. The limp was barely noticeable now. I watched until it disappeared into the trees, until I couldn't see even a hint of movement anymore. I stood there for a long time after it was gone, just processing what had happened. This felt like closure in a way. Or maybe not closure, but completion. A circle completed. I'd saved the creature's life. It had thanked me with a gift. And now we'd met again and acknowledged each other. both healthy, both safe. I returned to my camp and sat by the lake for the rest of the afternoon. I didn't try to follow the creature. I didn't try to find its cave again. This encounter was enough, more than enough. I realized I'd been given something more valuable than those rabbits, more valuable than proof or evidence or fame. I'd been given proof that intelligence and gratitude transcend species, that something unknown can coexist peacefully with humans, that there are still mysteries in this world. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes mysteries don't need to be solved, don't need to be exposed and studied and picked apart. I packed up my camp that evening, one last look around the lake, committing it all to memory. I thanked the forest silently for what it had shown me. I felt changed by all of this, transformed in some fundamental way. I drove home with this secret knowledge, changed by the experience, marked by it. Some mysteries don't need solving. Some encounters don't need proof. Sometimes it's enough to know you made a connection and saved a life, even an impossible one. I still hike those mountains regularly, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of something large moving through the trees. Just a shadow, just a shape that disappears before I can focus on it. I never approach, I never try to get closer. I just raise my hand in greeting, a simple acknowledgement, and continue on my way. Some friendships are meant to exist at a distance, and that's perfect. For more interesting stories, check this out.